Hello everyone. Welcome to the Stars Engineering channel. I am Mariano Sanz. This video was not made with artificial intelligence, and the fact that my voice sounds electronic does not detract from the validity or credibility of what I wrote in this video. Today we are going to talk about the controlled demolition of the fifth column. All evil ends up destroying itself. I recommend you never to follow any guru, teacher, spiritual guide, religion or God, because idolatry leads you to fanaticism and generates dependencies. And because, the moment you follow someone, you deprive yourself of freedom, you lose your power, and you stop recognizing who you really are. Marcus Witt. Introduction. Thanks to the collaboration of some followers of the channel of the fifth column, La Quinta Columna, LQC, who have been vetoed, censored or expelled in a humiliating way due to the intransigence and blindness of their administrators and their distinguished leaders for trying to make visible their concern, position and opinion about what is happening lately in the fifth column due to the very dangerous drift towards religious issues in frank dissonance with the spirit of the eminently scientific channel, we have decided to make this second video, which could be considered as a distress message, a voice of alert or a warning for all those who are witnessing the debacle suffered by the channel La Quinta Columna TV in the face of the impassivity of its directors and the more than evident interference by entities that could well be under the orders of them. It should be clear that those of us who intervene here and contribute our feelings and experience recognize the great work done by LQC for the good of humanity. But we do not work for them, nor are we children of Satan or any snake, terms with which the main collaborator of LQC has baptized us, and we only want the good of the channel so that it recovers its initial spirit in normal functioning, remove everything that causes interference and distortion, and incorporate elements that we believe are important for the good and healthy evolution, not only of the channel, but of the afflicted followers who see night after night how they are terrified with stories of meteorites and are led to think that they are going to be filtered, swept, and eliminated because they are facing entities that cannot be challenged and defeated, when from here and with all the information in hand, we know that it is possible and that it involves empowering people and making them masters of their destiny with the appropriate tools. Fundamentals. In a previous video entitled The Fifth Column Seduced by the Dark Side, the link is in the description of this video, we already indicated that the information discovered by LQC was of utmost importance to humanity as it exposed the plans of the globalist elites against the human population. This information, which was being vetoed by all the media and social networks, was very dangerous, and by revealing it, the members of LQC put their lives at risk. At the same time, we said that the elites, the cabal, or them knew that there were too many people watching them on their channels to send a henchman to physically get rid of the channel directors and end the problem, but in this way, they would give confirmation to what LQC had discovered. Instead, and given the evidence, we firmly believe that a channel with so many followers could establish an easier, cheaper, and more advantageous way to reorient the channel and also obtain energy returns from it. The channel could be recycled through timely intervention and parasitization and thus become, not only an energetic egregore feeder, but also a weapon that would work for them without having to part with anyone physically. In the aforementioned video we pointed to the possibility that this could be easily achieved by mentally and emotionally controlling one of the two main directors of the channel because of his religious background and because he is the ideal person to be parasitized and controlled, and in turn with the power to control the fervent devout masses of LQC followers. We said that his past as a recalcitrant ultra-Orthodox Catholic would be a key asset to play against the LQC itself, discrediting all the good and truthful information that LQC had obtained with its investigations, and thus, the cabal would reverse the devastating actions against the elites and their masters, them. Now we have doubts about whether this character was already parasitized from the first moment he appeared on LQC's programs and was controlling the narrative from the beginning to torpedo the investigations of the channel's founder. We have doubts about his affiliation to the Catholic religion, and precisely when what we believe to be his wife appears, is when he shows his face and we see him a staunch defender of Jewish law. Why this change now? This doctor, who boasts of wisdom and consummate research, turns out to have become a rabbi who uses LQC to make Jewish propaganda, proselytize and praise the figure of Yahweh, who, as we will see later, is none other than a ringleader of what LQC has called them Many of us have become aware of the dangerous drift towards the Judaic religion and especially towards the worship of Yahweh that this man has insisted on embedding within the spirit of LQC, greatly influenced by his wife who was an ultra-Orthodox Jew and defender of the scriptures of her God Yahweh and the Mosaic 10 Commandments that are nothing more than commands written by them. Attempts have been made on our part to warn the doctor that what he is doing is dangerous and also that he applies the factory, which LQC shouts so much, to everything that does not fit, except Yahweh. But he has refused to listen. None of this can be refuted within a channel that was originally for scientific research and debate, and we are perplexed how, in the face of reasoned, determined, courageous and educated arguments that indicate that the doctor is wrong when he considers that Yahweh is a benevolent God and does not want to see that he is one of them, his reaction is excessive, out of his mind and his posture intransigent, subjective, emotional, and irrational. He is perceived as completely out of place, as if he were no longer the doctor of the beginning. He is perceived without a solid posture on which to lean to speak in debate, and that is where he is portrayed. To expose him and make him clear how wrong he is, he calls us children of Satan or children of the serpent, when he has no idea what the serpent genuinely symbolizes. All this is very serious from our point of view, and we believe that it looks like it will get worse. But our concern lies with the biostatistician who founded the channel. Will he react in a timely manner to the self-destructive internal attack, or will he take the reins that save him from the stake? Is he independent enough to take action, or does the doctor, enveloped in an aura of Yahweh's demonic obscurantist superiority, have him too psychically controlled? Perhaps the biostatistician does not take action because he already depends fully on the income generated by the channel, and this depends on the number of followers of the channel. But what if the followers get fed up with the doctor's mystical outbursts, his adoration of the demiurge and his apocalyptic sermons? If so, we will witness before our eyes the disappearance of the main channel and its reconversion into a probable sect with the metaphysical implications that this entails, creation of an egregore-lish energy feeder. Paths LQC doesn't want to follow, and why? Not only have we warned LQC of what can happen if the channel's religious drift continues, we have also made proposals to include them in the forbidden zone, or what we believe should already be called the empowerment zone, since the usual news that they launch in the channel's nightly programs do not tell us anything new and insist on what we all already know. These proposals should guide us directly towards immersion in the paths of true spirituality, learn where we come from, what we are, what power we have and how to defend ourselves from theirs as attacks, being able to defeat them with some practice, being able to achieve a critical mass that within LQC could be easily obtained due to their high number of followers. In order for LQC to be able to provide this service to its followers, it should have an open program in this empowerment zone where researchers who are experts in these topics are invited to give their point of view and teach followers the necessary spiritual foundations and the methods and techniques to defend ourselves against them. But this path, from our point of view, could become a double-edged sword. On the one hand, the followers would be given tools to train and fight against them, but, on the other hand, they would be empowered and little by little they would lose contact with LQC that would have helped them in their spiritual self-development, which would represent, without any doubt, follow an individual path and completely separate from LQC. The latter would mean a probable decrease in followers if LQC did not know how to maintain night after night the interest within its channel about these essential tools for human beings and their spiritual evolution. Besides, if LQC continues on this path, it would have to be done without the doctor's presence unless he realized and assumed his great mistake and that what he intended led nowhere, only to ostracism and the probable destruction of the channel. The original source or primordial origin and who we are. For what has been said above, it is essential to assume that there is no God like Yahweh or Jehovah. That these are archontic entities or demiurges disguised as the ancient gods who fight against humanity and are the ones that we, empowered humans, must fight. We have to know that the only God, removing all religious connotations, is what in some spiritual circles is called original source or primordial origin, also ether, the whole, universe, unified self, unified consciousness, potential energy field, divine matrix, etc., which is a compendium of universal energy that contains all dimensions or densities and all existential frequencies and vibrations. We, souls inhabiting a body, are holographic or fractal fragments of the original source, and our soul is an expression of consciousness of the original source that embodies or incarnates in a biological body. In turn, the interdimensional archontic entities are part of the source of darkness, as some authors call it, which is part of the original source that contains everything. This source of darkness is a dense field of frequencies or low vibrations from which all evil is born. Who is God and who is not? Deduced from the above, the only gods that we can conclude that exist are ourselves, since we are part of the original source, endowed with the ability to love, to create universes and to be kind to others and without wishing them any harm, transcending the mental construct of duality. We do not need to be commanded because we already have written in our DNA our way of behaving with ourselves and others in a loving way. Everything else, wherever it comes from, cannot be considered a god, but an evil spawn from the source of darkness. The God Yahweh is no god. Documents, research and authors who attest to this. No. Yahweh is no god. Moreover, Yahweh is Satan himself, although the new rabbi of LQC insists on differentiating the two figures. Yahweh's mission is what it has always been since the time of Atlantis and Lemuria, to preserve humanity's status as a spiritually ignorant and industrious creature, to enslave and settle it in a prison farm called Earth in order to extract vibrational energy distilled from the sufferings and negative emotions of its slaves. That is what interdimensional entities live on. They live off evil and the egregores created by humanity that function as energy feeders. And they are not only fed by the precious and succulent energy that the souled human being gives off, but also by biological food. And all this has been told to us by expert researchers who have immersed themselves in the deep study of the sacred scriptures, the Old Testament and ancient texts of all kinds, where the misdeeds of that demon-possessed being who calls himself Yahweh are evident. These renowned researchers are David Icke, Salvador Freixedo, J.J. Benitez, Jimenez del Oso and others, who, now the erudite ultra-orthodox rabbi of LQC discredits and disgraces because he does not like how badly his God Yahweh looks, precisely with that which he defends so much, which is the empirical investigation of the facts that bring us closer to the true physiognomy of that vengeful, violent, bloodthirsty, criminal and genocidal God. The good doctor, feeling attacked, reacts violently, as a serpent would, to our comments about the true nature of Yahweh and that it is clearly explained in the Old Testament, to which he argues that further research overcomes and confirms that Yahweh is a benevolent God and justifies his murders by saying, if killing identifies you with being an evil being, how do you defend yourself from those who want your death or threaten to kill you? What about the legal figure of self-defense? And we ask ourselves, does an all-powerful and omnipresent God need murder to defend himself from his enemies? Why doesn't he use love to appease them? And could it be that this God was not such and that he was so bloodthirsty that he killed his enemies for pure pleasure or to feed on human suffering? There is plenty of proof and evidence that what we say about Yahweh's true nature is true. From the Book of Enoch to the Old Testament there are endless passages that describe the barbarities and misdeeds carried out by this supposed God, and that, for example, J.J. Benitez comes to count more than 1 million dead sacrificed in his name as reflected in his book The Wars of Yahweh. That to write it he has scrutinized and conscientiously researched all the Christian scriptures, Jews, and Muslims. Below, we are going to expose some fragments of research carried out by the aforementioned researchers where the true physiognomy of Yahweh is reflected. In the following video of the interdimensional warrior, Salvador Freixedo appears at minute 38 seconds tells us. Their great task and at the same time their great pleasure is that we humans are excited and upset or suffer because in this way our brains produce the waves they like. These waves can be, as we read in the Bible referring to Yahweh, a calming aroma, as they say, for these evil gods. Let us not forget that the Yahweh of paradise was a lowercase god disguised as God with a capital letter, but he was as reptilian as the serpent. The whole of humanity lives and has lived, without realizing it, under a formidable program of mind control organized from on high. In the following video of Jackaner 73 the Book of Yahweh's Wars by J.J. Benitez is discussed. At minute 1 minute and 13 seconds Benitez tells us. Someone knows that reality, that team that used the name of Yahweh and decides to send Moses to take that group of approximately 600,000 people out of Egypt with their cattle. After all the mess of plagues and deaths of the firstborn that you start to think, it is terrible that a God kills the children and firstborn of a people who were also not to blame for anything, and in any case the Pharaoh was. To me, that doesn't fit me at all. I can't conceive of the good God and the blue father killing children and firstborn. On the other hand, we have the very intense works of Michael Tsarian, in which he shows us studies of other researchers and tells us something about Yahweh. Next, in a description he makes of the symbology represented in the monument of the memorial in Washington, D.C., he tells us. In this case, the phallic pillars or obelisks represent the generative energy of the male creator God. This great sun god, Yakin or Jakin, is also known as Lucifer, Adon, Aten, Yahweh or Jehovah. He is the vengeful demiurge of primitive-minded Jews and Christians. The symbol of his erect phallus is found in numerous cities and towns around the world, from New York to Belgrade, from Moscow to Johannesburg. He also tells us, no writer explains the situation better than Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. She knew that the traditional interpretation of the Genesis story was deliberately misinterpreted so that readers could not discover the reasons why women have been oppressed. His words pierced the nets of deception. The appellation Satan, in Hebrew, an adversary, belongs by right to the first and cruelest adversary of all other gods, Jehovah, not in the serpent who spoke only words of sympathy and wisdom. In another excerpt, the War of the Gods is recorded in the Bible. Veiled references to it include the term firstborn. This euphemism appears in the Old Testament. We read that Jehovah struck down Pharaoh's firstborn. Later, in the New Testament, King Herod goes after the firstborn of the so-called Israelites. The term firstborn relates to the original progeny of the serpent masters, i.e., the members of the Lemurian race. Alluding to the Exodus. Many of high rank within the church prove to be as violent as their God, whose wrathful and ruthless character is evident from texts sanctified by the church and revered by believers. Anyone who offers sacrifices to other gods, instead of offering them to the Lord, will be put to death, Exodus 22-20. Jehovah is a man of war, Jehovah is his name, Exodus 15 verse 3. Then he recommends. We suggest that readers reflect on the aggressive behavior of the gods, particularly Jehovah. After all, no strange god is known to history. Rational students should ask what kind of person would follow such an insane god. They should delve deeper into the issue. The answers serve to illuminate the reasons for the state of decadence in the world. The issue was discussed by the great revisionist scholar Kersey Graves. In the Bible of Bibles, he wrote, did God create beings in his own image and then treat them as if he wanted to tempt them and make them unhappy? It would seem that he created man for the sole purpose of tormenting and fighting with him. Common sense suggests that it is the act of an ignorant or tyrant to implant in man the desire to eat fruit that he did not allow him to eat. God must have had the power without the will to prevent the act of disobedience, which would make him an unjust and ruthless tyrant. Or the will without power, which would make him a weak and fragile being, and not a god. We cannot wonder, therefore, that the Christian believers of the Bible, who have chosen this book as the supreme rule of their conduct, have written their history in blood, and that the whole road of their pilgrimage is strewn with the bones of their murdered victims, who were killed for being faithful to their consciences, and for believing and worshiping God according to their convictions of right and duty. Alluding to Bakunin. The philosopher Mikhail Bakunin addressed Jehovah's penchant for sadism in his book God and the State. This champion of human freedom wrote, Jehovah, who of all the good gods worshipped by men was certainly the most jealous, the most vain, the most ferocious, the most unjust, the most bloodthirsty, the most despotic and the most hostile to human dignity and freedom. Jehovah had just created Adam and Eve, to satisfy we know not what whim, doubtless to pass his time, that he must pass heavily in his hands in his eternal selfish solitude, or that he may have some new slaves. He generously placed at his disposal the whole earth, with all its fruits and animals, and set a single limit to this complete enjoyment. He expressly forbade them to touch the fruit of the tree of knowledge. He therefore desired that man, devoid of all self-understanding, should remain an eternal beast, always on all fours before the eternal God, his creator and his master. But here comes Satan, the eternal rebel, the first freethinker and the emancipator of the worlds. It makes man ashamed of his bestial ignorance and obedience, it emancipates him, stamps on his forehead the seal of freedom and humanity, by urging him to disobey and eat the fruit of knowledge. Then, remembering that he was not only a God of vengeance and wrath, but also a God of love, after having tormented the existence of a few thousand poor human beings and condemned them to an eternal hell, he took pity on others, and, in order to save them and reconcile his eternal and divine love with his eternal and divine wrath, always greedy for victims and blood, he sent into the world, as a scapegoat, his only son, to be killed by men. Michael Tsarion proposes something disturbing. As mentioned earlier, it is difficult for a rational person to reconcile the heinous acts perpetrated by Jehovah. They are hardly the work of a good or truly divine presence. It makes more sense to believe that they were perpetrated by a human agency. It is the only theory that does not reek of priestly propaganda. In fact, the scriptures admit that Jehovah was a being in human form. How else have you agreed to show your feet, hands, and back? Jehovah revealed almost everything except his face. He also ate and drank. Behold, I come to you in a thick cloud, that people may hear when I speak to you, and believe you forever. And Moses spoke the words of the people to the Lord, Exodus 19 verse 9. Here is something interesting that he mentions. Thanks to recent discoveries, we now know that the book of Genesis was not original to the so-called Jews. It was a rewriting of earlier Sumerian, Babylonian, and Egyptian texts. The Christian version was devised to depict God as an eliminated supernatural presence. It was vital to the priesthood that Jehovah be interpreted as a supernatural and omniscient being. Their strange acts and torrent of violence were justified. He was enraged because of the man's stubbornness and irreverence. Religion conditions man to believe that he is an inveterate sinner. He has good reason to do so. Men are less likely to condemn God for their malfeasance if they believe that evil is within their own hearts. The survival of religion depends on the continuation of violent and abusive acts. Michael Tsarion then tells us, the church thrives on emotional and sexual repression. It has no rational answers to offer to man's existential predicaments. In fact, the unnatural ideologies of religion make the human condition worse. The church cannot give answers to the question of evil because it is evil. The priority of sorcerers is not only to downplay the reasons for Jehovah's maniacal behavior, but to conceal his true ancestry. They don't want the laity to know that the God of this world was devised by physical beings from another world. Let the whole earth fear the Lord, Psalm 33 verse 8. And extracting a fragment that mentions Sigmund Freud, he tells us. Freud's words take us to the heart of the Moses Akhenaten enigma. We know that Akhenaten's god was Aten. Despite the denials of numerous experts, there can be no doubt that Aten is the same god worshipped by the Israelites under the name of Adon. However, Adon is the pseudonym of Jehovah or Yahweh. Therefore, Aten, or Adon, and Jehovah are one and the same. Yahweh, commander-in-chief of them. Regardless of the nature of Yahweh, which for us and many researchers cannot be human given his brutal and demonic behavior, what is evident is that, whether he represents a single being or a corporation of highly regressive exogenous or endogenous hyperdimensional entities, this entity ravages and rules the world through his human figureheads, warlocks and sorcerers in a conglomerate that LQC has called them. These sorcerers and warlocks are the ones who help them enter this dimension and impose their dominance. Despite this, which for us is undeniable, the doctor accuses us of attacking only Yahweh and no other demons. But, apart from Yahweh or Jehovah, what other gods are there? The rest of the entities that make up the Archon and Reptilian Corporation are under power under Yahweh. And it's not that we're attacking him, but that the doctor insists on talking about him on LQC shows and on his channel anytime, anywhere, and deliberately pulls him out of the factory equation when everyone knows he's evil. It seems that as far as Yahweh is concerned, the doctor has lost all his capacity for reasoning and has extinguished his common sense that should indicate to him, as the world goes due to religions, that Yahweh, wherever he comes from, or wherever he worships, has a lot to do with it and must necessarily be included in the conglomerate of them. Only he is incapable of seeing this, and what he argues to defend his God or perhaps his wife's God is totally indefensible. We observe a doctor who seems lobotomized and completely out of his mind, whitewashing a genocidal mass murderer whose teams are made up of draconian, gray, and other entities, trying to leave us buried in the paradigm of religions that are, undoubtedly, one of the sources from which many of humanity's ills emanate. May he show us all his investigations where Yahweh is exonerated of the crimes he has committed and raised to the glory of heaven as a kind and just God. LQC interference, parasitization, and control. In view of the disproportionate, unforeseen, and incredible reaction of the supposedly attacked doctor and prophet to the warnings and messages of some of us asking him to consider Yahweh one of them and include him within the factory and stop evangelizing the LQC movement with Judaic harangues and, moreover, due to his change of behavior and totalitarian religious drift, we believe that the doctor has been impersonated, interfered with, or parasitized, and that his wife has a lot to do with this whole matter, since this change in behavior is perceived since his wife begins to appear in videos with the doctor inside the channel, reading passages from the Bible and other sacred texts. Obviously, if he is parasitized by some archon entity that belongs to them's team, it is perfectly understandable the negative reactions of the doctor when his boss Yahweh is mentioned, leaving aside his good manners, his education, and his capacity for reason. They already control the narrative and the future of LQC. If what we say in the previous paragraph is true, we can assume that LQC's narrative and its programs and outside of them is already being controlled by them and their human minions. We are seeing that the scientific debate has been usurped and changed by the religious debate that causes, on the one hand, a greater distraction in the followers so that they forget the good work done by LQC, and on the other, generates great distrust among the followers, among them many of us already banned and who were from the beginning, that we are witnessing, with astonishment, the self-destruction of LQC if this is not stopped. LQC as an energy feeder. Monumental egregore dedicated to the demon Yahweh. On the other hand, the discouragement and fear generated in many followers night after night by the doctor in his forbidden zone with his apocalyptic proclamations full of meteorites, sweeps and creepy filters, and the adoration and celestial emotion of other followers due to the doctor's new evangelical vein, is turning the LQC channel into an egregore of enormous dimensions that will serve for their god Yahweh or the reptilian archontic corporations, participating races, or whoever they are. Have energy food while squeezing the doctor and his acolytes and controlling their movements. In all this, the behavior of the biostatistician who seems immutable and sometimes complicit, suffering from a visible learned helplessness, who avoids confronting the problem in the face of the evident drift of the doctor mentally controlled, most assuredly, by them through his wife, does not go unnoticed. If the founder of LQC does not react soon, he will see his channel collapse to the ground. The 10 Satanic Commandments. Having come this far, we cannot forget the laws that the doctor follows and that he believes to be genuine, given by his God Yahweh to Moses. We only have to state that the first commandments are a command for Yahweh to be above everything, your family and your loved ones, and also indicate who you should worship so that the generation of worship energy is propitious. Thou shalt love God above all things, thou shalt not take God's name in vain, and thou shalt keep the feasts holy. It is evident that if he does not want to apply factor E to his God, he is not going to apply it to the 10 Commandments either. We have to warn Mr. Doctor that if he needs an outside force to give him a decalogue so that he knows how to behave in the world, then he is in very bad shape. It seems that inside him his soul, his divine spark, has abandoned him and his DNA has been deactivated, because the doctor should know that the true commandments are written in the DNA of a soul being, and if you need some tablets to decorate your wall and remind you to be kind to others and not to do anything that you do not want done to you, then we can conclude that you have been deprived of your divine spark and are being ruled by an evil parasitic entity. There will be no asteroid, filtering or sweeping. No, Mr. Doctor. There will be no filtering, no sweep and no asteroid to regret it. Stop instilling fear in people. There is a solution for everything, even if you do not want to apply it out of pure spurious interests or supine ignorance. If you see everything in the world so badly, you could save us suffering and get yourself out of the way if you see that the asteroid doesn't arrive in time. Although, it is not necessary to go to those extremes. We don't want what we don't like to happen to you. That's a universal cosmic law of code of love engraved in our primordial cosmic DNA. Leaving LQC and not showing up anymore would be enough. In addition, this would devote more time to your new life and LQC would surely regain its power and splendor that you are stealing from it. The renegades of LQC as precursors of their solution to the disaster. We, the renegades of LQC, do not see filters or sweeping brooms. We don't even see asteroids or meteorites. We have a fighting spirit, and we are not satisfied with watching them destroy us. We want to fight, and we know that there are tools to do so, something that the doctor and his collaborator, the biostatistician, have not bothered to investigate because they have surely realized that the LQC glittering business could disappear or lose importance. Well, we, the expelled from LQC, had offered alternatives to fight against them, but it was easier for them to ban us from their channels instead of listening. This says a lot about censorship, which does not help at all to expand and move forward. Solutions and proposals to combat them and hope for a better future. As we had said at the beginning in the paragraph, paths that LQC does not want to follow and why, our proposal to combat them, once they were identified at the top of this macro operation against humanity, was to empower people and make them masters of their destiny with the appropriate tools. This proposal also included modifying the name and content of the Forbidden Zone and suggested calling it the Empowerment Zone. This new area should guide us directly towards the exploration of paths that to date LQC has refused to cover due to ignorance, neglect, or spurious interests. These paths should aim at spiritual growth and expansion of consciousness, learning very important things such as where we come from, what we are, what power we have and how to defend ourselves from their attacks. Due to the large number of LQC followers, this expansion of consciousness, on a global level, could be an important factor in achieving the final victory over the forces of evil. We can suggest that, in order to succeed in this new space, LQC could invite researchers who are experts in these topics and knowledgeable about the interdimensional entities that rule the world. For example, the Spanish researchers listed below may be the ideal or most interesting candidates to appear in the Empowerment Zone.
Fran Parejo, un salto cuántico. Javier Consuegra, Jaconor 73.
Manu M., the interdimensional warrior.
Eduardo Colleto, Cygnus 1. Pablo Cano, Human Etheric.
Many other authors in English language. We believe that LQC's work should not only focus on seeking news about the harmful effects of graphene oxide and other technologies, but also on enhancing this new potential zone. Obviously, this would only be possible if the current damage suffered by LQC is slammed with what we are publicly exposing. The controlled demolition of the fifth column. As a conclusion and end of this video, we have to say that we are undaunted by the controlled demolition of LQC thanks to the active participation of the doctor and the passivity or consent of its founder, probably out of friendship and complacency, avoiding confronting him. Finally, as abused and expelled followers of LQC who have tried to prevent the disaster described, we ask you to be very careful, please, with the messages that you allow to be published on your channels by this cooperating doctor, calling us sons of Satan or sons of the serpent, because, in view of the evidence given here, it is beginning to be too evident that this gentleman has set out to whitewash that bloodthirsty God with lowercase letters from the Old Testament who calls himself Yahweh, and also, very conveniently, trying to brainwash the most unwary and trusting followers. We have already explained in this video that this being also belongs to all these types of hyperdimensional entities, and due to its rank, it is defined as the demiurge, which is a controlling and parasitic entity from the underworld. In this way, by the divine grace of that same collaborating character who speaks out and defends him, he once again wraps the blanket around his head, showing his unconditional dedication and adoration to Yahweh by doing impossible pirouettes to disguise it as love, having to resort, again for this, to disrespecting all or the vast majority of LQC followers. We really do not know the objective of this, but throughout the video we have outlined the possible reasons for his behavior, revealing and giving away his pathological obsession with separating Yahweh from the rest of the controlling satanic entities or factory and wanting to make an exception for him. Everything, according to his sectarian religious and personal interests. Actually, this whole affair is regrettable and sad and an act of profound malevolence and cowardice of the collaborator who seems to have as much authority and kinship in his actions as the false god whom he professes admiration, Yahweh, demanding that the administrators of the channel censor comments, like a true tyrant, exhorting the expulsion of these veteran followers who truthfully show him the totally true and verifiable facts in the sacred scriptures, these facts being irrefutable and indisputable, thus preventing the possibility of returning to sanity and expansion to reach the truth. And we are concerned that you will prevent it, as if it were the same methods as the Stasi, or that they will authorize the humiliating and degrading treatment of that collaborating character, reducing to the category of subjects those who with courage and arguments refute and discuss your more than subjective and irrational religious position and assume the responsibility of warning you. We ask you to respect us and not to continue to happily fail the human beings who are free spirits and still belong to this LQC channel, even if we can no longer comment on anything, because some of us are censored, so that you know that the disqualifications of this subject who collaborates with you are regrettable and surreal. This guy is doing them a disservice and, moreover, with a view to the future, by letting him, as one of the two main members of his movement, shamelessly reconvert and identify LQC with the most rancid and ultra-Orthodox Judaism, which, with a high degree of probability and certainty, we know is behind the ideologues and planners of the atrocities occurring in the world and are necessary collaborators with them. We have reached the end of the video and the end of this topic. I hope you liked it. Share and like. Thank you very much and see you in the next works.